Hey everybody, it's Brad.
And Darb.
And Darb. Oh wow, that was fast that time. Okay. Golly, how do we? It's terrible because every time we start one of these, I'm like, how do we tell people the most depressing things on planet Earth and do it
with
in a fun way?
Do we need to play like circus music in the background?
Yeah, we could do that. So, gosh, today we're going to cover
the truth.
The truth. Who, and today's is kind of who is the enemy. Mm-hmm. And this takes a little bit of digging. Right off the bat, we tend to want to, I think, simplify stuff.
Yeah.
So when we were first looking at this, all the stuff that's going on, you want to just go, well, it's China's fault, or it's, some pharmaceutical company's fault. And there's actually, I think, a lot more going on here than most of us really want to admit.
Yeah.
And so you have to dig into some concepts. This one's going to sound kind of conspiratorial, like conspiracy theory.
Well, once you break into what conspiracy theory is,
yeah,
that'll change it. But
that term,
the
where it
idea
actually came
of
from,
the truth, and what's happening,
yeah,
and why it's happening, and how it's happening on purpose,
mm-hmm.
and how historically what we're seeing happening now, it didn't just 2020 showed up and bam, everything went shitty. No, this has been an ongoing process that rolls downhill and repeats
throughout time.
And I'll go back to what I said, I think, on video 1. People see things now instantaneously because of the media and Twitter and the internet and Facebook. And the minute you talk about it, you post about it, your friend posts about it, and then they're sharing it. 100 years ago, something happened, and it was months down the road before anybody knew who, what, when, where, why.
Why, yeah. And so, yeah, I think one of the things we want to cover is conspiracy theory, and even
what that is. Even
the term conspiracy theory, that was actually a term that was coined by the Warren Commission.
Well, explain to them what that.
Well, yeah, I will. The Warren Commission, they were actually the people that did the investigation on JFK Jr. and his assassination, and they're the people that came up with the official version of it. The whole single bullet theory, lone shooter.
You're talking about President John F. Kennedy.
Yeah, President John F. Kennedy. And so anybody that basically didn't buy the Warren Commission's take, they labeled them as a conspiracy theorist, and it was purposefully meant to sideline people. It was meant to keep people from digging any further because you didn't want to be called a conspiracy theorist, and that's actually where the term came from.
Yeah.
And
it stuck.
And it stuck, and I think it's worked very, very effectively throughout time. But I think we've gotten to a place in the last couple of years where conspiracy theorists have kind of become factual theorists. We've talked about that before too.
Yeah.
And the lie has just gotten so big and so egregious that there's no way to just put the conspiracy theory cap on it and make it go away. And so to dig into the history of this, like you said, it takes, in the old days, it took a long time for history to spread. And I think that's part of where we're going to go. We're going to take some deep dives into some historical bases for some of the things that you see.
Yeah.
And it's like this. You don't have to believe everything. But if a person comes to you and they say, I want to kill you, you may want to take that person seriously, that they actually mean what they say. And so if you want to follow God, you have to follow the truth, because the truth is part of God. And like, there's truth in the Bible, but there's also truth in the world around us. And if somebody comes to you and like literally says, I want to do you harm, or I want to hurt your family, well, that may be the truth. And you need to be willing to look at some really uncomfortable things. That doesn't mean that you have to believe them. It doesn't mean that you have to be part of the bad guys' camp. But you have to understand that there are other people out there, and they mean what they say. Yeah. And they have been saying this stuff to us for a long time throughout history. Yeah. Gosh, there's roots of this we've talked about that go back to the Nazis, World War II. And and the beyond of that is Prussia. A lot of people think of Nazis, and they think that that's just where it ended. But everything that the Nazis believed actually came from earlier iterations and earlier ideas. And those go all the way back to Frederick the Great and the King of Prussia. The concepts, as we've dug into this, the concept of like World War I and World War II, and now people are talking about World War III. Well, the World War I really wasn't, what we found is World War I really wasn't the First World War. No. The First World War that we would want to think of and probably classify as a world war happened back in the 1700s. And the creation of our country was actually kind of a response to that. The King of Prussia, this guy Frederick the Great, his dad was called the Soldier King, and the son was... the son is considered by most military people as being the most brilliant military strategist alive. He came through some really weird stuff. So the dad was a really ardent, straight up military thinker, and he wanted to pass on all of this stuff to his son. And his son was, God, how do we say this? He was effeminate. He was gay. He had a lover. The father killed the lover in front of the son in a very, very brutal manner. And it warped Frederick the Great into such a way that he picked up probably the best or the worst military attributes of his dad, but he was also brilliant in thinking about things like infiltration, not invasion. You don't always have to use military force. He is really where the idea of like what we would think of as like global domination, like that kind of like Dr. Evil, I want to rule the world. That literally, he literally kind of coined that. That was literally what he tried to do. And he did it through a bunch of different facets. It wasn't just military force. It was politics. It was infiltrating governments. It was banking. Yeah. A lot of what he did to control the world was banking. And when we were fighting the Revolutionary War against the British at that point had already largely come under the influence and control of Frederick the Great. And so in a really weird way, the American Revolution was a proxy war between the colonists and Frederick the Great. Or freedom and tyranny is probably a better way to look at this. In fact, if you really want to do some crazy word studies, we came across tyrant. And the word for tyrant in the Greek is, I think it's titrianos, and it's literally the root word for titan, tyrant, like tyranny, and then also titan is a root for where we come up with the concept of Satan. And so it's just really weird that all of these things kind of tie together. Frederick the Great, Prussia. If you do some studying about Prussia, most people think of countries having armies. And what Frederick the Great developed was an army that controls countries. And that army has never really been defeated. It has flowed down through about 250, 300 years of history, and it's had a massively warping effect on the world. And people that follow kind of the Frederick the Great cult there tends to be, like when we dug into the Bohemian Grove stuff, there tends to be a lot of like the transgenderism type, homosexuality, women or men pretending to be women in front of everybody, kind of flaunting it in front of people. Some of the things that we're seeing, and we're going, this looks really weird. If you understand Frederick the Great, it's not weird. It's actually all parts of his kind of psychological makeup.
It could, a lot of it, well, I don't know. Historically, I don't know how early it falls, but you can kind of tie things. It goes back to that hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
Theater.
Yeah.
Lots of theater in the early centuries were based on, there were no female actors.
This is very Greek, and
but,
Greek military did the same thing.
Japanese kabuki, theater of the no. They were all men portraying women.
Yes.
And it's just kind of, that was very accepted because people dressed up and went to that was a cultural thing when you went to the theater and you accepted these things. Well, it has just spilled over the stage, exit the stage door left, and become societal norm. And I think it all goes back to that.
And so if you're hearing weird things like so and so's wife is really a man, if they're following this particular cult of thinking, then you may really seriously want to look at that.
Well,
and
it's so and so's
Yeah.
wife, families of famous or celebrity families that had children, and now as they're older, there's one child and a best friend, or
do you even want to go into that one? Oh my gosh,
we're touching the third rail.
Yeah,
but I mean, there's Crystal Trent and I had an entire conversation in the kitchen about that. Okay, we're going to touch it. We're going to touch it, and if
time-wise,
we'll get it. You know, there are some celebrity stories of certain people who may have had a brother or sister when they were small children, and then now that they're in their 40s, they don't have that brother or sister, but they got a buddy, and they got a family friend that hangs out.
Yeah.
Or there's one I will bring up and go. You can go find the research. Jamie Lee Curtis. Actually, there's a
whole bunch
circulating story of Janet Lee. Is it Janet Lee and Tony Curtis?
Yeah.
They had children, and the first announcement of Jamie Lee Curtis's birth was about their son, Jamie Curtis, and now all of a sudden, it's Jamie Lee Curtis from the Halloween movies. And don't at me, Jamie Lee Curtis. If that's an issue, then you need to come out and defend that picture. But it's like,
and I think it's kind of like this. You don't have to. Gosh, you have to be critical. You have to be critical thinkers.
Yeah.
You don't have to necessarily buy into all of these, but as you're looking at a lot of information, you may be running across certain repeating patterns.
Yeah.
And you have to understand where those patterns came from.
And that goes back to, don't take it from us. We're just giving the information. We're sharing what knowledge we have. You need to take that and go, buy it and figure it and learn on your own.
Okay, so that was a big kind of loop-de-loop. So we're gonna go back to the King of Prussia, Frederick the Great, his effect throughout history. The Kaiser, World War I, that was all driven by Prussia. In fact, that was literally kind of the end game of Prussia as a state.
Yeah.
And then you started to see Germany. You started to see the Republic of. Oh, now my brain is lost. That's where you started to see the changeover from people recognizing Prussia and then recognizing Germany.
Okay.
As a nation state, and a lot of what you saw with Hitler and the Nazis in World War II was trying to go back to the glory of Prussia. And so a lot of our ideas, now that we're looking at the Reichswef, which is the World Economic Forum, but literally, if you want to go back and do your research on the history of that, you're going to find that their beginnings literally are the end of the Third Reich turning into the Fourth Reich. And that was something that was happening in South America and in a lot of different countries the world over through the 60s going into the 70s. They decided that it looks like early through the 50s and 60s they were trying to regroup as a military, like what you would think is an overt military operation. And they decided in that time frame to be more covert, more like controlling governments from the inside, all that stuff. And so that's one of them. The other one, and this is a real third rail for a lot of people, is oh god,
we're good at those.
Yeah, and again, we don't totally believe in all of these things, but this is what we're being told. And when you start to dig into it, you have to look at the information that's there, and you're going to have to do some critical thought on yourself or for yourself. So the next one is this concept of the kingdom of Khazaria. And this actually ties into the kingdom of Prussia through the banking families that Frederick the Great used to start controlling different countries around the world. Khazaria is historically a place that we would call Ukraine. It used to be called Ugrain, but the Ukraine is the historical home of the Khazarian Empire. From everything that I can kind of dig about it, because it's very hard to find a lot of this stuff, it is a holdover of the Khanganate, which comes from Genghis Khan, the territory that he controlled. And back during the 7th and 8th centuries, they basically had the very early Muslim kingdoms on one side, and they had Christendom on the other side. And so the king of Khazaria basically asked one side, hey, can we get along how would we get along if we converted to Christianity or Judaism or Islam? And so he asked the Islamic Empire how that would work out, and they said, well, we can get along with Jews and Muslims, but not Christians. And they went, okay. And then they turned around and they asked the Christian kings, hey, how would we get along if we were Christians, Jews, or Muslims? And they said, well, we can get along if you were Christians or Jews, but not Muslims. And so overnight, the kingdom of Khazaria basically adopted Judaism as their religion. Now, depending on which historical record you want to go down, they adopted Judaism overtly, but a lot of their practices probably were not totally Judaic in nature. And so and now you fast forward to today, and you have a lot of the Eastern European Jewish people. And I'm not talking about the people specifically today or their beliefs today, but historically, they have come out of that conversion. And you can get into the theology of the Torah, which is basically the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and then the Talmud, which is a little different, and then things like the Zohar. Things start to get very, very weird in the interpretations of different things. And so depending on what an individual person's belief system is, they could be believing something that you would recognize all the way to something that you would go, I don't even know what the hell this is. If you're coming from like what we would consider a Judeo-Christian perspective, you'd be looking at it and just be like, what is this? And so, and that encompasses things like Kabbalist traditions and things like that. And this is we're not making any judgment or theological demarcation in the sand. We're just telling you the history as we're starting to learn it, and what you're going to have to start thinking critically about. The Bible says that in the end times, which I think we're probably in the Sky Blonde show now. But in the end times, Israel is going to be a stumbling block to the rest of the world. And I think we're starting to identify exactly what that stumbling block is. And it comes down to something like this. Who is Israel?
Mm-hmm.
What is Israel?
Yeah.
And so is Israel a nation state? Is Israel a particular group of people? Is Israel a belief in God? Kind of like when God said everybody that followed Abraham was going to be his children. Well, what was it that made Abraham different? It was his belief. He actually wanted to have a relationship with God. So now this who is Israel question kind of comes into firm light. There's a lot of misunderstanding about this stuff. When you go back to kind of the very beginning of this stuff, about 700 years before the two kingdoms, or should we even get into that right now? You had the two kingdoms. You had Israel in the north, you had Judah in the south. That was 12 tribes total.
Yeah.
For the tribes of Israel. 10 tribes, the northern kingdom, was actually taken into captivity about 700 years before the rest of Judah was taken into captivity. Those tribes went north into Syria, and then as the Syrian Empire fell apart, they just continued dispersing north through a lot of what we would call Europe today. Yeah. And those are the lost tribes. Nobody really knows where they go. If you want to take some time and do some real research on the heraldry, the languages, the family symbology, you get a pretty good clue of where they went, but that's where Israel dispersed. Today, most people think of Jewish people, and even that is a misnomer, because the J in Jew didn't even show up until the 1600s. It was Juden, and but the people from the southern part of what we would think of Israel, Judah, most of them are called the Sephardic Jews, and a lot of them actually went to Portugal and Spain, which is where their lineage is today. And so if you think of like really who is the descendants of those people, it's a lot of Portuguese and Spaniards. Of which Darby's actually one of. So it's kind of interesting as we did this research. We're like, hey, this is really crazy. Well, that leaves this idea of Israel as a nation state, which we're totally pro-Israel.
Yeah. I
mean, as a couple of modern people, but you have to kind of go, what is going on? And so some of the Khazarian families, back to the story and what's going on with Frederick the Great, they actually wound up controlling a lot of the banking. And banking, like we know it, is largely non-biblical. And by biblical, I mean God detested the concept of usury, which is where you would lend.
He was flipping tables over for crap like that.
Yeah, which is where you lend people money and you collect interest on it.
Yeah,
and that's usury.
Taxes.
Taxes. Oh, taxes is kind of that. Taxes actually is a.
It's all.
That's a modern derivation of tithe, but when you understand what the Federal Reserve is, and that the Federal Reserve is not really government. The Federal Reserve is a private banking institution, which is run by certain families. It is interesting because when you say, I want a road built, and they say, okay, you're going to pay taxes, your taxes don't go directly to the government, and then the government turns around and
buys materials for that road.
Takes the money for the road, yeah. What they actually do is they take your taxes and they
go on vacation.
Give it to the Federal Reserve, and then the Federal Reserve.
You buy hookers and blow, and they record it on their laptops.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what it turns into. But the Federal Reserve then walks over to a computer, and they make ones and zeros, and they lend it back to the people of the United States.
Yeah.
for an interest payment, and that interest payment is basically the 2% that they tack onto the taxes every single year, and that's why we have a national debt. And so, if you've wondered where the national debt comes from, that's literally where it comes from. It's 100 years of that interest just growing and growing and growing and growing and growing.
Yeah,
and so God doesn't like that. That's absolutely non-biblical.
No.
We're not supposed to be doing that. And so that's where you look at some of the banking institutions and what they've done. These are, it's not good things. When you look at what has happened with Frederick the Great's ideas about infiltration versus invasion and the financial stuff,
it's that history repeating, or historical preface to all things happening now.
Yeah.
You talk about I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. Oh, that's a horrible thing, huh? We're talking about biblical things that God doesn't. It's like that Frederick the Great. He's like the, who's the godfather of soul? Motown, isn't that James Brown?
Yeah.
Good God. But he would be the grandfather of bizarre pagan rituals, I think. I mean, if you want to tie all these things that are happening today,
yes.
And like I said earlier, hidden in plain sight, you can draw a curly Q-ish line right back to
him. Yeah, and a lot of the weird behaviors that we're seeing, a lot of the weird stuff that we go, this shit doesn't make any sense. If you actually go study Frederick the Great and his life.
Yeah, symbology. Isn't he the guy that had the thing on his house?
Yeah, he actually had this. He has a place called Sanssouci, which I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember exactly.
You say that, and I think of my dad's stereo system. That's an entirely different story.
Yeah,
Sansui. It was called Sansui.
So, Sanssouci, I believe, is the correct name for it. But the way he had, that was his other place. So his other house was literally called the House of the Dragon, or the House of the Red Dragon, or something like that. It's some weird stuff, especially when you go and you do some research into the biblical stuff that we're talking about. You kind of go, oh, Frederick the Great. Oh, he starts to fit a lot of
weird,
check boxes. So, but in the one house, I can't remember what the one name, but it has a totally innocuous name, like the house of the little house something or other. But if the way he changed the punctuation where the apostrophe was, it basically was the house of my little penis is what it was. And so he did a lot of weird, like, in your face kind of stuff.
Which we're seeing
happen today.
In your face.
Things like Bohemian Grove, things like some of these secret societies. I will tell you that, and this would be a shock for a lot of people. A lot of people don't like to hear this, but as you dig into it, you find some of this stuff, like Freemasons and the Masonic orders and all that stuff. There was a point in time when Frederick the Great's army, for lack of a better word, recaptured the United States in 1871. It was the Act of England, and it literally set up an agreement between D.C. and the Vatican in London. And Frederick, or the King of Prussia, basically was the master arbiter of the entire arrangement. So no matter what arrangements those three forces agreed to, it was the King of Prussia who was the final say on everything. And you can go look it up, the 1871 Act of England. You look at the other things that happened in 1871, the development of District of Columbia. Who really owns the District of Columbia? Is it really...
Aren't they going through something right now? They want to make that the 51st
state, and there's a bunch of weird stuff about where DC came from. There's also in 1871 is when Albert Pike did rewrote a lot of what we think of as like Freemason Masonic stuff. And most people don't know that Albert Pike was literally a Confederate general. And for lack of a better way to say it, that he had sworn allegiance to the King of Prussia. And so you look at infiltration, not invasion. There were literally manuals back in the mid 1800s that talked about any kind of secret society, they were going to infiltrate it. And it was literally the lack of open transparency that they used against those organizations. And it didn't matter what they were. If it was a secret society, they were going to infiltrate it, and they were going to take control of it. And so that's why you see today even governments where you kind of go, didn't we elect this guy? And then you see a government leader like in Australia or New Zealand or some of these places where you see government leaders that literally no longer serve their people.
Yeah.
They're serving somebody else, and they're following a particular checklist of what they've got to accomplish, but it's not what their people want.
No.
And so
Canada,
yeah, some just weird stuff.
The,
So, I don't know, how much more do you want to...
man, that's a lot of information.
Yeah.
But I mean, you really, if you don't get all the information, the good, the bad, and the ugly, you can't read. You can't just read through all the stuff that
you want to hear. There's enough of that happening in certain places now where you're just being fed stuff you want to hear, and that's why we're in the predicament we're in today. Because nobody is looking at the ugly stuff, learning the ugly stuff that really happened. Historically, it really, really did happen. And we need to go, this happened, it sucked, and we don't want it to happen anymore. Because if we don't...
it just happens over and over and over again.
And if you want to... I'll try to make this quick. If you want to try to understand things in terms of physics, it's almost like the fall that we read about in the Bible, where the angels fell from heaven. Imagine that they were like a pebble hitting the surface of a pond.
The ripple effect you're talking about.
Yeah, and so the ripple effect, and we see this over and over and over throughout history. We're like, why does history repeat itself? Because that fall, that was something that happened in the spiritual realm, but when it hit our world, our timeline is literally the surface of that water. We're seeing a ripple of that one event occurring over and over and over in time. And until we all recognize what it is that we're looking at, that's why I think we really have a problem with things just continue happening again and again and again. At some point we got to understand it, recognize it, and then make decisions in our own lives.
Yeah.
How to just say, nope.
You can break it down even smaller so it's attainable. We talk about a lot of stuff in the worldview, but in your personal life, you can be in charge of that, because you can be the one person in your family. We have the family. You have somebody in the family that does something the same way. They're the guy that bangs their head on the wall all the time and comes to you and asks you why there's always a bruise, and you have to go, you can't do the same thing and expect different results. Which is what is referred to as generational curse. And you can be the person that stops all the crap that happens to your family if you just put your foot down and go, we're not doing like this anymore.
Yeah. And there's some, like I said, we've been talking about ways that you can do that. As far as living local, deciding where your money goes, deciding how you're going to live your life, your relationship with the boss, and then...
you don't like the way...
Yeah.
You don't like the fact that you go to the grocery store and there's new food on the shelf. You don't like the fact that you go to the pharmacy and they're charging you $200 or something you can get out of your backyard for free. Grow your own food. Grow and create your own medicine. Figure out where your dollars are going and what they're spending your dollars on, and changing how you spend your dollars with people who don't support crap you don't support.
Yeah.
I mean, it's plain and simple.
So, go ahead if you have questions. I'm sure there are probably people that hear this and they're hitting the roof. If you've never heard it before, you're probably going to be like, oh.
It's the top part.
Oh, that's awesome. Gosh, technology. You
Yeah, I
love
know.
it.
No, interact with us. Leave us a comment.
Yeah.
Rumble, I don't know if you can or not. There is we watch the entire of the show, and they are always talking about their chat thing that has got problems. Well, okay, I think their chat thing has problems. But you can leave a comment. We are on Rumble. We are on BitChute. We are on Spotify. We are on YouTube. The Sky the Lawn Show podcast. Find us.
Yep.
Like us. Don't like us.
Don't like us.
Talk to us.
Okay, I think we're good.
I think we're good.
Okay, awesome.
I think that was it.
Ciao.
Oh, I'm hungry.
You want to go eat?
Ciao.
That mean old casino, cleaned my pants and hung him out to dry. Drown the town of Reno, leave the lights on, let him die.